In 1979, deep inside the Walt Disney Studios, a director stared at the final page of his shooting script and found nothing there. No ending, no resolution, just a spaceship, a black hole, and a blank space where the most expensive scene in studio history was supposed to be. What happened next was hidden from audiences for decades. A sequence filmed inside the Vatican. A romance erased from the film entirely. A finale so strange that Disney itself got frightened of what it had made. This is the story they never fully told. Welcome back to the channel. If you love uncovering the buried history behind classic films, the deleted scenes, the studio battles, the endings that never made it to theaters, you're in the right place. We dig through old interviews, archival reports, and forgotten production notes to bring you the stories behind the movies you thought you already knew. Today, we're heading into deep space and into one of the strangest production stories in Disney history. Make sure you're subscribed, because this one gets stranger the deeper we go. The movie is The Black Hole. Released in December of 1979, it was Disney's first ever film to carry a PG rating. It was also, at the time, the most expensive picture the studio had ever made. On the surface, it looks like a fairly simple story. A ship called the Palomino discovers a black hole. Near it, they find a derelict vessel, the Cygnus, somehow holding steady against the pull of the void. Inside is a scientist named Hans Reinhardt, alone with an army of robots, chasing an obsession that has kept him isolated for 20 years. It sounds straightforward. It is anything but, because behind the cameras, The Black Hole was a film without an ending. A film shot in pieces, by two separate crews who barely spoke to each other. A film where actors were never given a full script to read, and when the time came to finish it, the studio flew a crew to Rome, filmed inside one of the most sacred spaces on Earth, and then quietly buried what they shot. What audiences saw in theaters was only part of the story. What they never saw might explain why the film has haunted viewers for over 40 years. Let's go back to where it all began. The idea for The Black Hole didn't start as a reaction to Star Wars, even though most people assume it did. The project had actually been developing inside Disney since 1975, 2 years before Star Wars ever hit theaters. Early on, it carried a different title, Space Station 1. It began as something closer to a modest science fiction adventure, loosely echoing Disney's own earlier hit, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, only this time set among the stars instead of beneath the ocean. Then Star Wars happened. In 1977, George Lucas's space opera didn't just succeed, it rewrote what audiences expected from a big-budget genre film. Every studio in Hollywood suddenly wanted its own version of that lightning in a bottle. Disney was no exception. The studio put its long-simmering space project on the fast track, poured resources into it, and prepared to release its most ambitious, effects-driven film yet. But something was different this time. Disney wasn't just trying to make another family adventure. Studio executives wanted to prove they could make a film for teenagers and adults, not just children. It was a bold shift for a company that had spent decades building its identity around wholesome, all-ages entertainment. The pressure to get this right was enormous, and it shaped almost every decision that followed. Director Gary Nelson took the helm, working alongside legendary production designer Peter Ellenshaw, whose visual imagination would come to define the film's haunting, gothic tone. The cast came together with serious talent: Maximilian as the obsessive Dr. Reinhardt, Anthony Perkins, Robert Forster, Ernest Borgnine, and Yvette Mimieux. It was, on paper, a serious, dramatic ensemble for what was still being sold as a Disney family film. But almost immediately, the production ran into a problem that would follow it all the way to release. Nobody could agree on how the story should end. Here's where the mystery really begins. According to accounts from people who worked on the production, the movie was shot in an unusual and fractured way. Two separate filming units worked on different parts of the movie at different times, and reportedly, they weren't fully aware of what the other unit was doing. Even more surprising, the actors were reportedly never handed a complete script. They worked from partial pages, scene by scene, without a clear picture of where their characters were headed by the film's final act. Now, imagine being an actor in that position. You're delivering dialogue, reacting to danger, building a performance, and you don't actually know how your story concludes. That uncertainty wasn't just a technical hiccup behind the scenes. It bled directly into the finished film. Watch The Black Hole today, and there's a strange, disconnected quality to some of the performances in the back half of the movie, as if the actors themselves are searching for meaning they were never given. And there's a reason for that. Because when the shooting script finally reached its last page, according to director Gary Nelson himself, there was no real ending written at all. The script simply said the crew would go through the black hole. And then, nothing. No description, no resolution, just an idea, waiting to be invented. Nelson later admitted plainly that the production had no ending for the film as shooting wrapped up its principal photography. Think about that for a moment. Disney was pouring $20 million, an enormous sum for 1979, into a film that, as the cameras were rolling, still didn't know how it was going to finish. So the studio turned to its most visually gifted collaborator to solve the problem, Peter Ellenshaw. As both production designer and creative force behind the film's most ambitious images, Ellenshaw worked directly with Nelson to construct an ending almost from scratch, late in the process. Screenwriter Jerry Day then took their ideas and shaped them into actual script pages. It wasn't the usual, orderly path a screenplay takes from page to set. It was closer to invention under pressure, a team building the emotional and visual climax of the film after most of it had already been shot. But what they came up with first was not what audiences eventually saw. This is where the story takes its strangest turn. As Ellenshaw and the production team worked out how to end the film, they landed on an idea of staggering ambition. The crew would descend into the black hole, and their journey would end with a vision of transcendence. Kate, the ESP-sensitive scientist, played by Yvette Mimieux, would find herself gazing into an image of creation itself. And to capture that image, the production didn't build a set. They went to Rome. Disney secured permission to film inside the Sistine Chapel, using Michelangelo's ceiling, the legendary fresco of the creation of Adam, as part of the film's climactic imagery. The plan called for an extraordinarily precise camera movement, a slow track pulling in toward Kate's eye, and then pulling back to reveal the painted heavens above, connecting her journey through the black hole to the very origin of life and creation. It's a breathtaking idea for a studio science fiction film. It's also, frankly, an audacious one for a family-branded release. And as the production moved closer to finishing the picture, Disney's leadership began to get nervous. According to Gary Nelson, as the film neared completion, studio head Ron Miller and other executives grew uncomfortable with how overtly religious the sequence felt. They didn't want the film's climax carrying that kind of spiritual weight. So the Sistine Chapel footage, filmed with genuine Vatican cooperation, built around one of the most famous images in art history, ended up cut from the film entirely. It never appeared in theaters. It has never been officially released. Let that sink in for a second. Disney flew a production crew across the ocean, secured access to one of the most protected and sacred artworks on the planet, filmed inside the Sistine Chapel, and then quietly shelved the footage because it felt too spiritually intense for a PG family film. What audiences never saw was a version of the black hole that ended not just as science fiction, but as something closer to a meditation on creation, death, and rebirth, wrapped in imagery borrowed from one of the greatest works of art ever made. So if that ending was scrapped, what replaced it? The team pivoted to a different approach entirely, one clearly inspired by the ending of Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. The final sequence that made it into the finished film is a strange, wordless descent through swirling colors, fire, cathedral-like structures, and surreal imagery, meant to suggest that Reinhardt's consciousness has become fused with his robotic creation, Maximilian, and cast into a kind of mechanical hell, while the surviving crew ascends through something resembling heaven. It's one of the boldest sequences ever attached to a Disney release. It runs for roughly 7 minutes, almost entirely without dialogue, and it plays less like the ending of a children's adventure and more like abstract art. For a generation of kids who grew up watching this on television or home video, that ending became legendary, confusing, unforgettable, and just a little bit terrifying. But here's the truth that took decades to surface. That surreal finale wasn't the film's original destination. It was assembled in the final stretch, built to replace an even more ambitious sequence that Disney itself got cold feet about. The Vatican footage was the road not taken. What we got instead was the studio's second attempt at answering a question they never should have left unanswered until the very end of production. Now let's talk about what else never made it to the screen. Buried in interviews from around the film's original release is mention of a completely different kind of scene, one that had nothing to do with cosmic imagery or surreal descents into darkness. It was a quiet, human moment, a deleted romantic scene between Kate, played by Yvette Mimieux, and Dan Holland, the ship's captain, played by Robert Forster. This scene reportedly surfaced only once, in a promotional interview conducted around the time of the film's theatrical release. It has never appeared on any home video release. It isn't on the DVD. It isn't on the Blu-ray. According to collectors and film historians who have tried to track it down, it may not exist in any accessible archive at all. Think about what that means for the finished film. The theatrical cut of The Black Hole gives us a fairly cold, distant ensemble of characters. The crew feels more like colleagues thrown together by circumstance than people with emotional histories. But if a romantic connection between Kate and Dan was filmed and then removed, that changes the emotional temperature of everything around it. A relationship that could have grounded the film's back half in something warmer, something more human, was quietly left on the cutting room floor, and largely erased from public memory along with it. Why would Disney cut it? We don't have a confirmed studio explanation, but the pattern fits everything else we've uncovered. This was a production constantly negotiating between ambition and caution, trying to be edgier than any previous Disney release, while still terrified of alienating its traditional family audience. A tender romantic subplot may have simply felt like it slowed down a film that was already struggling to balance spectacle, horror, and sentiment in its final act. The result is a film that feels, even today, oddly hollow in its character relationships. Not because the actors couldn't deliver, but because pieces of what would have made those relationships breathe were never given the chance to reach an audience. And the missing footage isn't the only thing that shifted the meaning of this film over time. Different versions of The Black Hole exist, depending on where and how you watched it. Prints in 70mm format, along with certain releases distributed internationally, included an overture, a musical opening played over black picture before the film even begins, setting a tone of old-fashioned cinematic grandeur before a single image appears. That overture survived onto certain letterboxed home video releases and broadcasts, but disappeared from many standard theatrical and television prints. Then there's the matter of television broadcasts. Versions of the film aired on daytime British television reportedly removed a specific image near the finale, a shot of what fans call the angel, a ghostly figure flying through arches during the surreal climax. Broadcast standards at the time apparently found the imagery unsuitable for daytime audiences, so it was quietly excised, cutting directly from an earlier shot to the crew's escape, smoothing over the strangeness that theatrical audiences had originally seen. Small changes like this rarely make headlines, but they matter. Every time a broadcaster trims a few seconds here, removes an image there, they're not just editing for time. They're reshaping how an entire generation of viewers experience the story. Some viewers grew up believing the film's most unsettling images were never even part of it, simply because their regional broadcast quietly removed them. There's also the matter of the film's rating itself and what it cost the studio. The Black Hole earned its PG rating largely due to a handful of profane lines of dialogue and the sheer intensity of its final 20 minutes. A stretch filled with explosions, violence, and imagery far darker than anything Disney had put its name on before. For a studio whose brand had been built for generations on wholesome, all-ages entertainment, this was a seismic shift, and audiences noticed. Reports from the period describe a wave of complaints and hate mail directed at the studio from parents who felt betrayed by a Disney film that pushed into darker territory than they expected. That backlash had consequences that rippled far beyond this one movie. It's part of why Disney's very next PG-rated release was stripped of the Disney name entirely, and part of the reasoning that eventually led the studio, years later, to launch an entirely separate label, Touchstone Pictures, specifically to house films that pushed beyond the traditional Disney brand. In many ways, The Black Hole was the uncomfortable first step in a transformation that would reshape the entire studio's identity over the following decade. Director Gary Nelson was reportedly so conscious of this tension that he made a deliberate choice during the marketing of the film. He didn't want the picture released strictly under the Walt Disney banner. Instead, it went out through Buena Vista Distribution, a move Nelson has said was intentional, meant to avoid scaring away older viewers who might otherwise dismiss the film as just another kids' movie because of the Disney name attached to it. It's a small detail, but it says everything about the anxiety surrounding this production. A studio trying to grow up, a director trying to protect his film from being dismissed before anyone even bought a ticket, and executives nervously walking back the more daring choices, one scene at a time. There were also real physical dangers during filming, the kind of behind-the-scenes chaos that rarely makes it into the finished cut. During production on the film's chaotic escape sequence, actor Robert Forster was reportedly struck in the face by swinging debris on set. He suffered a cut near his eyebrow, was quickly stitched up by a doctor, and returned to filming almost immediately afterward. It's a small story, but it captures something important about this production. A set under constant pressure, moving fast, absorbing injuries and setbacks along the way, while trying to hit an unforgiving release date. So how did all of this affect the finished film psychologically, for the people watching it? Picture the version of The Black Hole that could have existed, a film where Kate and Dan share a real, tender connection, giving the audience someone to emotionally root for beyond simple survival. A film that ends not with abstract, disorienting imagery alone, but with a genuinely awe-inspiring callback to human creation itself, rendered through one of the most famous images in art history. A film confident enough in its emotional stakes and its symbolism to let both pieces breathe. Instead, audiences got a film caught between two identities, trying to be a children's adventure and an adult meditation on obsession, isolation, and mortality at the same time, without fully committing to either. The romance was removed, leaving the characters feeling more isolated from one another. The most spiritually ambitious ending was replaced by something stranger and more abstract, disconnected from a clear emotional through line. What's left is a film that many viewers describe as haunting, unforgettable, and confusing all at once. Not necessarily because that was the intended effect, but because so much of what would have clarified that ending never made it to the screen. That disjointed feeling isn't a flaw in your memory of the film. It's baked directly into its production history. The truth was hidden for decades behind studio caution, lost footage, and a production that was still inventing its own ending as the cameras kept rolling. And here's what makes this story even stranger. Unlike most major studio films from this era, very little behind-the-scenes documentation of the black hole survives publicly. Collectors and historians who have gone looking for production photos, contemporary cast interviews, or archival footage describe an almost frustrating scarcity of material. A handful of images of the miniature ships. A few photos from the wrap party. Making of documentaries that rely almost entirely on footage from the finished film itself, with only much later interviews from crew members filling in the gaps, and virtually nothing from the cast at the time it was made. For a movie built around themes of things lost in the void, that feels almost too fitting. The production history of the black hole has, in its own way, become something like the black hole at the center of its story. A place where footage, interviews, and entire creative choices simply vanished, leaving only fragments behind for those determined enough to go looking. So the next time you watch that strange, wordless final sequence, the fire, the cathedral shapes, the figure walking through arches, remember what almost was. Remember the camera that was supposed to pull back from an actress's eye to reveal Michelangelo's ceiling. Remember the quiet, romantic scene that only a handful of people have ever seen. Remember a script that, until nearly the very end, simply did not have an ending at all. The black hole gave audiences a finale meant to feel like transcendence, but the real mystery was never inside that swirling void on screen. It was behind the camera the entire time. In the reels that got left behind, the pages that got rewritten under pressure, and the choices a nervous studio made when its own ambition frightened it. Some of that footage may still exist somewhere, sitting in a vault, unseen for over 40 years. Or it may be gone completely, lost the same way so much of this production's history has quietly disappeared. Either way, the version of the black hole audiences finally saw in theaters was never the whole story. What do you think happened to that missing footage? Do you think Disney should have kept its original, more spiritual ending? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed uncovering this hidden history with us, subscribe for more deep dives into the secrets Hollywood tried to leave behind.